All right, today we're going to dive into a world where the line between science and spirituality doesn't just get blurry, it completely vanishes. We're going to explore something called coastal physics, a discipline that just fundamentally reimagines how we could understand the universe.
So, let's just start with a huge question. What if the act of measuring a wave, or, predicting a tide, was actually an act of devotion? What if the scientific method and a sacred ritual were literally the exact same thing? This is the core idea we are unpacking today.
In the world of Arreqqana, they call this coastal physics, or in their own language, Qhavreniq Na Sola. And you can see right from the definition, it's a hybrid. It's all about combining empirical observation, the hard data, with ceremonial interpretation. It's the data and the divine completely hand in hand.
So how in the world does this actually work? Well, it's built on these key pillars that manage to blend two fields of thought that we normally keep totally separate. Let's take a look at what they are.
So you've got your hard science, things like wave mechanics and saltwater thermodynamics, sitting right next to concepts like sacred waveforms carrying elemental energy. Tide-pull harmonics are studied right alongside lunar alignments, not just for gravity, but for their spiritual significance. In Arreqqana, it's all just part of the same curriculum.
To make this whole thing work, the Arreqqana use what you could call a dual-track approach. But here's the thing. These two tracks are constantly weaving together. They end up as a single, unified path to knowledge.
On one hand, you have the empirical layer. This is pure physics, right? Hydrodynamics, sediment transport, all the measurable data you could want. But on the other hand, you have the spiritual layer where that exact same data gets this incredibly deep cultural meaning. A specific wave pattern isn't just interference. No, it's an omen. A current isn't just a body of moving water, it's the memory of their ancestors. And one isn't more important than the other. They're just two ways of reading the same page.
And this isn't just some abstract theory either. Let's look at how it's actually practiced. A scientist priest might use something called prism buoys to get super precise measurements of light diffraction on the water. That's the empirical tool. But that data is collected as part of a light refraction rite, which is a spiritual vigil at dawn. They use a tidal spectrometer to measure wave resonance, but they interpret those readings as Nakarin currents, which could be seen as blessings or warnings. The tool and the ritual are totally inseparable parts of the exact same action.
And, this isn't just some academic curiosity for them. Coastal physics fundamentally shapes every single aspect of Arreqqana society. It literally builds their entire world.
This quote, it really says it all, doesn't it? In this culture, you simply cannot separate a physical fact from its spiritual or its societal significance. The how of the world is always tied to the why, and that philosophy is woven into the very fabric of their daily lives.
Okay, let's make this really tangible with a perfect example. It's a high society engagement ceremony they call the Gala de l'Iral Promenade. And get this, it isn't just a party, it's a practical application of coastal physics.
The ceremony has to follow 4 very precise steps. First, they wait for high tide, which symbolizes fullness and stability for the couple. Second, they analyze the wind vectors to make sure conditions are favorable. It's only then, when the physics lines up perfectly, that the formal announcement is even made. And the final step is a symbolic reading of these perfect conditions, which acts as a blessing for the couple's future, a so-called unbroken journey. It's meteorology and matrimony all rolled into one.
And its influence goes way, way beyond social ceremonies. Coastal physics is the absolute bedrock of their entire civilization. It dictates their economy by figuring out the safest trade routes. It shapes their whole societal life. And it forms the core of their defense with advanced harbor design and uncanny storm prediction. It truly touches everything.
So, you've got to be asking, what kind of worldview even makes this possible? Let's dive into the core ideology that's humming away behind all of it. The first, and honestly the most important principle, is that the pursuit of knowledge is, in and of itself, an act of worship. To study the natural world is to honor it. So for them, there's no conflict between faith and reason because reason is the language of faith. The second principle is this deep-seated belief in working with nature, not against it. Their entire engineering philosophy is about aligning with natural patterns. So they don't build massive seawalls to fight the ocean. No way. They design harbors that actually use the natural currents to protect their ships. It's a philosophy of harmony, not of conquest.
And finally, this integration is reflected in their people. The roles of scientist, priest, and navigator, they aren't seen as separate professions.
A lot of the time, one highly trained individual will embody all three, because to the Arreqqana, these are just different facets of the same core skill, understanding the coast.
So when you put it all together, what you get is this completely unified worldview. Science, spirituality, and society aren't in separate boxes. They are equal, fully integrated pillars that support the entire civilization. One simply cannot exist without the others.
Which brings us to our final thought. Exploring a world like Arreqqana, it kind of forces us to look back at our own. It brings up a fascinating and maybe a little bit of a challenging question. In our own quest for empirical, objective fact, what have we lost by separating it from a deeper sense of meaning?